Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of our Justice and Peace's guest speaker series as we continue to profile paralegal and lawyer bencher candidates. As always, the views and opinions are of the candidates alone, and they don't reflect me, Justice and Peace's, Trios College, or any of the other education institutions or organizations that I'm affiliated with. Today we have a triple header, but first two are with paralegal bencher candidates from the Good Governance Coalition. First up, we have Demetra joining us. So first of all, thank you so much. And perhaps maybe you can start by telling us a little bit more about yourself.
Okay, well, thank you for having me, John Paul. My name is Demetra, as he said. I've been a paralegal since 2011, and I'm running in the coalition, Good Governance Coalition, to become a paralegal bencher. My practice is mostly I work in-house, so I have a bit of a mixed bag in terms of what I do. I do a bit of everything in terms of legal assistant, law clerk, paralegal, and I also do some solicitor work because I'm under the supervision of a lawyer. And so in terms of what I'm doing on the job, I work for a garbage and recycling company, so WM, and this company happens to be in 3 different countries, so Canada, US, and India. So my particular portfolio in-house covers Pacific Northwest is one market area, so that's basically the Canadian side of that is British Columbia. And then I have Canada. So Alberta, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Ontario, and Quebec. And then within that, I work with this small business customers rather. So when you're in-house, you only have one client, which is the company that hired you. And so I'm working with my business colleagues, and then they talk directly with the customers. So, and within that, usually because it's small business, if any of the service agreements have any issues, they usually, if we do a good job, they don't become small claims. But if they do, then that's also something that I'm looking at. And usually small claims work will be in Ontario and Quebec. So, and whenever there's anything in Quebec, people will wonder like, wait, that's outside of your scope. Anything that is outside of the Ontario paralegal scope always has counsel in the respective provinces. So for Quebec, we always have a Quebec counsel that we're working with that helps us with Quebec Small Claims Court. And on a side note, Quebec counsel cannot appear in small claims in Quebec, neither can the in-house representatives. It has to be somebody from the business other than those two people. So that's what I do during the day. And did you want me to tell you a bit more outside of that, or?
Sure. I mean, keep going.
Okay. And I also have my own business. So I'm also a health coach. So I have been doing that. That started as a passion project and it turned into a business over time. I was looking to just kind of help myself more, learn more about nutrition and fitness. And as I started delving into that more and helping myself, I became a walking billboard for other people, and they came up and asked me questions, wanted to know more. So it became a business. And of course, prior to that, I had done an MBA in Denmark. So I already had the business skills. I just didn't really know what I would do with them. So I've been doing that ever since. And people often ask me, they're like, well, how can you manage that? Well, I have an online business model where it's more like a lot of the stuff ends up becoming automated over time. So I can manage it because after a while, I'm not the one in the business all the time. So that's kind of how I do that. Did we freeze?
Yeah, no, there we go.
There we go.
So I guess when you've done all that, now I guess the next thing you're looking to put onto your portfolio is becoming bencher. Can you tell us a little bit more about why you're running?
Well, I mean, one of the big things is I'm a firm believer that if you want to see change, take steps to go where you can make change rather than sitting back and complaining about it. So I'm putting my name in to hopefully see the change and be part of the group that will help see change in the profession. So there's all these different things that I'd like to see. And, that's one way of doing it is put my name in. And in terms of timing right now, it's actually a very good time because I literally am finishing. Well, I had 2 governance roles. I was on 2 boards, 2 university boards. One ended last year, it was a 4-year term, and the other one, 6-year term, is ending next month. So I was also, people came to me and they're like, you should run. And a lot of them knew, like, we know these are ending and you have time now. So, so it's time wise, but also because I would like to see change. So I want to do something about it, be proactive in that regard.
So the biggest thing, I mean, now you're running as part of the Good Governance Coalition, and I've been talking to other coalition members, both on the paralegal and the lawyer side, but in particular, I mean, the response to the stop group of 22 individuals that ran the last election was where, again, this response there, we create our coalition. However, we're against the concepts of slates. But we're creating our own to respond to one. And then if we are elected, then we're going to maybe revisit the idea of slates to begin with, right? It kind of seems sort of circular and kind of hypocritical, right? To say the slates are bad, but our slate is good, but your slate is bad. And if we're in, then we'll get rid of all these bad slates in the future. How would you kind of reconcile this, especially maybe looking at it from the paralegal candidate kind of view, right? Because there are no other or as defined. I mean, the full stop group is not running paralegal candidates, to my knowledge. I mean, maybe I know
They're
may endorse
endorsing some,
people,
I've heard,
but why in the paralegal vein then that the five of you are running as part of the Good Governance Coalition?
well, part of it is essentially it comes down to we have similar values, and it was a great opportunity to come together with the similar values, share resources, and work together. But going back to what you were saying about comparing to the full stop, I think it's a great question because it does come up a lot, and a lot of people are probably wondering, well, like you said, how do you reconcile that? So, I think the fact that we are where we are right now is a sign of dysfunction in terms of how board governance works. And I wish it was different, but it's not. And so we have to operate within the current framework. And the current framework is such that there are no rules around this. And given what happened in the last election, where you got vote splitting because you had a group running together, and then everybody else, like the rest of the votes, were split among these independent people. So, we ended up with that situation. So now it feels more like a necessity to take this approach now with running as a group to counter what's happening. But because we don't want to see this again, like I don't want to see this again, that's where this need to make change. So you got to work in your current framework, but we also want to see change. And now in terms of differences, I know that one of the things that we committed to as a group was that we would not be all just saying the same thing and, being puppets. I'm very much an independent thinker. I certainly would not have joined if that was the case, that it was just, do what somebody else is telling me to do all the time. And I'd probably exit pretty fast. But so that's in terms of how do we talk about this whole thing. But and then in terms of the paralegal group, I know there's one other group that's running, obviously not 45 people and with lawyers, but I think for us it was really important to kind of come together with the lawyers because we're going to be working with lawyers. So it was a great opportunity to take lawyers and paralegals who are like-minded in terms of values, not necessarily agreeing on every single issue, because I don't know how you could find 45 people who do agree on every issue all the time. I think that, honestly, not just because they want to, toe the line, but that's really, for me, that was mostly is working with other people that are like-minded in that way and had a common goal of seeing good governance, and how we're defining good governance is, efficient. And well, at least the way I see it is it's efficient. It's going back to the core values of like, what are we trying to do here as the Law Society? You're always looking at it in the best interest of the public. So that needs to always be the front and center issue, and not get sidetracked with some of these issues that we've seen in the past where, you need board members to not just be looking at one issue or one specific issue with its different iterations, but really looking at as a whole, as a board member, looking holistically at how to run the operations of this organization, in this case, the Law Society. So that's really why I'm doing this, why I'm part of the group, and why now.
And I guess on that point, is there sort of this group ideology that, you're saying we're like-minded, but what's going to happen, let's say, and maybe we can just focus on the paralegal candidates, right? Let's say that all the votes come in and the five of you are all elected, right? Does that mean that the five of you are all aligned in pretty much what we want for the convocation, or even with the lawyer candidates as well that may be elected, or is it something different? Because again, it just sort of seems like, well, the pendulum is swinging back now, maybe in the other direction, kind of like in politics, right? When we go from liberal to conservative or NDP, that now we're going to have those same kinds of problems, but on the other side of the issue. So what would you say in response to that?
Well, having worked with the other four on my team just for a while now, for a couple of months, I can assure you that that's not going to happen. We don't agree on everything. We have overlap on things that we agree on, but we certainly have our own views on things that we want to see. Sometimes because of our different experiences, I think we're just coming at it naturally from a different angle. So I don't see it being again, like puppets. I do see us having our own voice. And I'll tell you, once you interview some of the others, I think you'll see there are very strong personalities here in a good way, like being very assertive in your views. I don't see people just doing what somebody tells them to do. I do see people standing up for what they believe in, speaking up when they don't like something. And that's something that I think is really healthy for a group. You need to have diversity of thought. You need to see that. And I've already seen that working with them, that we will speak up when we don't agree with something. And then I think the really important thing with the group is that you have a conflict resolution mechanism. So at any point, like, you're never going to agree on anything. So you just have to find a way that when you don't agree, how are you going to find common ground? And so we've managed to do that up to this point. So I feel confident that, if it is the five of us, that we will be able to achieve the goals of, we all have different platforms, similarity, there's some overlap, but we have different things that we'd like to do. So I do see that we have the skill set and the conflict resolution mechanism to see things through without just all being the same, of the same viewpoint all the time.
Yeah, and I guess on maybe the last thing on this point there, again, with discussion and certainly you're saying that there's not going to be like, well, this is going to be, the consensus official position the five of us are going to take, or the 40 of us are going to take, depending on however, or 45, I guess, potentially, if everyone's elected. Because I know that's a big criticism, right? I know there's even like a event coming up, and all of the Good Governance Coalition paralegal bencher candidates apparently are not invited because that you're part of this group ideology. What would you say kind of for anyone that still feels that they can't support Demetra because Demetra is running with Mike and Deborah and Michelle, and what would you say in response to that?
I think they need to get to know Demetra. So you can watch some of my previous interviews. I'm happy to chat with anybody who wants to learn more about me. I've been chatting with a lot of paralegals in the last couple of months, paralegal students, paralegal graduates, licensees. So I'm happy to chat with somebody who wants to know more about me. And I think part of this is that there needs to be a willingness on both sides. So I'm willing to do it. I would hope that somebody would not just look and make assumptions, but would look a little bit deeper and, critical thinking, and just really look past, I guess, some of the easy stereotypes that you can make about people.
And one of the things you brought up there is, with respect to working alongside some of the lawyers, right, in case that they're all elected, that, you can discuss some of the issues. I know even within the coalition, right, I saw that FOLA had some short little character questions in terms of would you support the expansion of scope for paralegals? I think there was something about a competency fund, and some of the answers said expansion, some said stay with the FLSP. I don't know if any from the coalition had said reduce it, but I saw some of those responses as well. So how do you feel that in terms of where there may be diverse thought even within the Good Governance Coalition in terms of the lawyer candidates, how working alongside them now and potentially where all of you can be elected, that some of the things that are important to paralegals, and more importantly, in the public mandate, right, in the public interest, that can be discussed and brought to convocation with the hopes of getting, expansion of scope, for example, or whatever else that you may be a proponent of, that the paralegals that are listening and trying to decide who to vote for should be buoyed by the potential that you can get these things done.
Well, I think with anything that we're trying to get done, it's always going to come down to establishing relationships with people. And yes, we've started doing that because we're working together. I'm working a little bit more closely with the paralegal candidates, of course, in the coalition. But I think that it's, we only have one vote. So yes, we have to build relationships with other people. And given the structure of convocation as it is right now, we're probably going to need a lot of lawyer votes in order to get anything passed. Not probably, but most certainly. So it's a matter, I think, of really building relationships and having that open discussion and willingness on both sides to kind of hear each other out and again, find common ground. So I think I can do my part in wanting to have the conversation and being open and listening, in the same way, listening to their views on some specific lawyer issues. And hopefully that will be the way to kind of move forward in that direction. But I mean, I can't control what other people do. I can only do my best to put my best foot forward and just see how that goes.
Now, you have experience there being on boards in terms of governance there. What sort of do you see from your experience there that perhaps, I know the coalition mentioned looking at electoral reform or just reform in general around slates, but what can you kind of compare and contrast with how the Law Society is sort of constituted through our benchers or our board of directors and convocation or board meetings with your experience there at U of T?
Well, I think not only from my experience at U of T, but I've also worked at one of the hats I've had in the past is I've worked as a management consultant. And one of the projects I worked on was for a nonprofit where we were specifically looking at board restructuring. And so with the question you're asking here, I think one of the things I've noticed that is different for like the Law Society versus some other boards I've seen is all the seats are up for grabs all at the same time. So if some of the current benchers, run again and get in again, then you have continuity. But let's just say you get all new people. That's not something I've commonly seen on other boards. Usually it's staggered and you might have like 1/3 of the board renewing each year so that you have the continuity, but you also have fresh voices and you have a term. So we have a term end date. I've seen that. So we have 4 years here for the Law Society, and you can renew. So basically you can have a maximum of 12 years. So 3 terms of 4 years each. And I've seen that with a lot of boards. And that was actually what we introduced with this board restructuring. We actually introduced a term end date because they didn't have one. But the other thing I've seen that is, from what I can see so far, is not present in the structure is this whole idea of a competency matrix where you're looking at when you have a board, the board is overseeing the operations of the company to make sure like it's following its strategic plan, it's on track. And usually there's certain skill sets you need on that board. You need those board members to have certain skills. So you want to have somebody who has the legal skills, somebody who has the accounting skills, marketing. You want all sorts of skills. You don't want everybody, for example, to be an accountant. Nothing against accountants, by the way, but if you see what I mean. So we're not picking people like that. And I would love to see that if we do have any sort of, if we have a committee for board changing like the practices and procedures, going for board reform, that is one of the things we look at is competencies that are needed. Because one thing I've seen commonly is that there's more litigators, like in terms of the lawyers, there are more litigators than there are solicitors. So now, that's a different stakeholder who has a different type of practice, might have different needs, and understand what the public needs are, that they're just going to be different. So it's important to have representation from the different stakeholders at the table. So those are things that I'd like to see and that I've seen that are different from this current structure.
Now with that in mind, I mean, like we've said, obviously that it's going to take 27 votes, right? Even if the 13 paralegal and lay benchers, you're still going to need a significant amount of the lawyers to kind of support any initiatives. But I guess maybe we can look at what are some of the things that are important to you if you're elected, in terms of bringing to the table. For, as you said, all you can do is bring it to the table and hope that you're able to build those relationships to get enough support to have those things passed. But maybe you can share some insight into some of the things that you think are important in this election.
So, I mean, the big one that people always talk about is expansion of scope. So in terms of that, any practice area that we're talking about when it comes to expansion of scope, the thing that I think is very important is to always look at this issue and know that it's not going to be a one size fits all solution, because there's so many groups. Like if you look at paralegals and the career of a paralegal, you're going to start off as a student. You're going to have students that are currently in school and are learning today's curriculum, that new thing that you want to do, maybe they are learning part of it or none of it. So how are you going to deal with that current cohort and their needs? Then you have the people who have already are working, are licensees, and already have experience maybe in that new thing you want to do. Are you going to give everybody the same rules? It doesn't make sense. So no matter what happens here, whether we're talking about immigration or if we're talking about family law, which are the two big things right now that people are talking about, I think it's important that we look at everything carefully and we look at the different scenarios, because that was quite a bit of the, like I was watching, I've seen on social media a lot of the comments that people are making, and they're bringing up, these are people from the different scenarios that I mentioned. And they're like, well, what about me? And what, I'm going to have to do this? And they're making good points, a lot of the time. So that's something we have to consider. So that's for expansion of scope. The other area that I think that is, well, that goes hand in hand with expansion of scope is really the curriculum review. Because if we're going to change things, you can't just change things across the board. How are you going to do it specifically so that it meets the needs of the change that you're looking to make? And I mean, I know that there was a report recently on changes that were being made to the curriculum. I think the best people to answer these specific questions about the report itself, or if there are any deficiencies or there's more, need for improvement or whatever, what have you, are probably the people that maybe like yourself who are working in education, who are frontline and know. So the only thing I can say about that is I know that there's inconsistencies. I know when I went to school, for example, with immigration, I had one course in my paralegal program. Some people after me had nothing. Some people said they had two courses. So there's inconsistencies. We need to look at it, take into account all the different scenarios, and likely not have a one size fits all solution. So that's for those two pieces together. The other thing that comes up quite a bit is looking at fees. And the common reoccurring thing that I hear about fees is we want lower fees. We want lower fees. And I think there needs to be a bigger discussion, kind of taking a step back and looking at what would that look like? What would need to happen for us to have lower fees? And there's the whole topic about self-regulation. Now, I didn't necessarily put it on my platform, but that goes hand in hand with the fees discussion, because if people want to be regulated, paralegals separately from the lawyers, well, we're actually getting quite a big benefit by being in a bigger group with lawyers, because we have reduced fees right now because the lawyers are in the same bucket with us, and there's certain services that we're getting. Like if we were alone, we would have to have, our fees would probably go up exponentially, because we would have to, from our fees, have enough money to run all the operations, all the different programs and everything. So we don't actually have enough people right now, licensees, to be able to do this in an effective way and keep the fees low. So I think that's something that people really have to look at when they're talking about fees. So the thing that I'm proposing, and if I get a seat, this is one of the things I'd like to recommend, is that we look at maybe a 6-month deferral for the LSO annual fees for new licensees. So what will that do? I'm hoping that will give a bit of a buffer to the new licensees, so that they can, take a break, take a breather, get their ducks in order, and then the Law Society still gets its full fees. So I'm hoping that's more of a meet us in the middle kind of approach. But I guess the disclaimer I have for anything is, I'm saying everything from the outside, from an outside perspective. So once you get in and you start looking at things closely, you might learn more and learn more about the feasibility of these different options and be like, it's not going to work. So, I mean, the one thing that I would say that a bencher needs to have in terms of a quality is be open-minded, be open to trying new things, at least trying them on, or like when I say trying them on, at least like hearing people out and saying other than your views, because I could find that the thing I'm proposing is just, it's not a good idea. So that's my take on fees. And then one of the other things I'm looking at is the regulation of technology in the provision of legal services, because AI is what a lot of people are talking about right now. It's constantly, I feel like constantly in the news. Technology is, we're at a point in society where like we're seeing more change is happening faster than we can adapt to it. So the thing here is that this is, in my view, a very urgent need to look at. And the Law Society is already all over this because the Futures Committee, there's a task force specifically. There's a pilot project that is already in the works for, I think it's access to innovation. So they're already on this, but that's something I'd like to see, I'd like to be part of and to continue looking at, because I'm seeing quite a bit of technology in my own business. And because I have my own coaches, I see what they're doing and they're very much immersed with the AI. So I just naturally am immersed in that world. So I'm seeing the application of AI, and then I'm looking at it also from a legal lens and being like, okay, well, what are some of the issues? So that one is something that is very, in my view, very pressing, because it's happening so fast and it's a bit of the Wild West in my view. So that's something that we urgently need to look at. And then finally, one of the things I'm looking at also, like I said, bencher election practices and procedures. So looking at the reform. And the other one I think we mentioned earlier was the representation on the board. Well, we didn't specifically talk about this, but yes, there's 3 groups on convocation, and you have lay benchers that have more seats than paralegals. So do I want to see it bigger? No, I want to see more of an equitable representation. So it might mean having more seats for paralegals and maybe more for the public, but fewer for the lawyers. I think 53 is a bit of a big number to be able to do anything efficiently. So that's where I'm at with my priorities.
Okay, so let's kind of try to go and unpack, each point there, and then let's go back maybe to scope, right? And you were talking about in terms of that, looking at the curriculum, and how would you like, I guess, in terms of, it's not like a one size fits all, as you point out, but kind of what would you like to look at in terms of, because I mean, I've heard everything so far from the 13 or so I've talked to already, and I'm sure the rest will have their own ideas on it. But, from one end, it's, look, we're licensed, we're paralegals. I can go from in-house, or you can go from in-house and start, doing provincial offenses, right? And you may never have done a provincial offense before, let's say, but nothing is stopping you other than, the rules of professional conduct, making sure you're competent, and you can start doing that, right? And as a lawyer, I mean, I can do that into family law, into immigration, if I don't have that experience, again, guided by that the rules of professional conduct, that I'm allowed to do that, right? And I guess the point there that's been brought up is, well,
why can't we do the same thing?
Why can't you do the same thing, right? And some are saying, well, look, if we get an added scope, that should be the parameters, right? We get more scope, and the same responsibilities do continue professional development, guided by the rules of professional conduct, that you're not going to start doing immigration law with no knowledge. But whether you had 1 course, 2 courses, 0 courses, 11 years ago in school, you're going to take those steps to become competent, whether you seek out an immigration lawyer to mentor you or what have you. So in terms of that, I mean, I know, again, you're not saying there's one sort of standard solution, but how do you kind of find a way to ensure, look, we want to look at expanding scope, but at the same time, as we all know, that you still need to get support from the lawyers that are going to say, hold on, because again, even on your own coalition, they're saying, okay, we don't want to go any further. Maybe there should be a competency fund, according to some of the responses there, for paralegals. So they're going to have some reservations of, just kind of painting a magic brush and paralegals can practice in all these additional areas. What would you kind of say in terms of balancing those sort of 2 points?
I think, you raise good points, and I've heard those ones as well. I think that one thing I'd want to look at is finding some sort of similarities between both professions in terms of how we approach things, because we're seeing, we're like, well, if they're allowed to do it, why aren't we allowed to do it? So I think we have to go back and look at this and be like, okay, well, how is this being done? Is there something we can do where it's we're taking a similar approach for both professions? Because I do think that there needs to be, if we're allowed to do this, then it becomes an issue. It's like, okay, it's your responsibility to become competent. And at what level are we saying that we've established competence if you haven't done this? Like, when was the last time that I did POA? It was years ago, in terms of schooling. I hadn't actually gone in, and that was never my area of practice. So I would definitely have to do a lot more work right now to get up to what I feel is like the level of competence. But I do think we'd have to just, like I said, look at both sides, like what lawyers are doing and paralegals, and in terms of what we're saying are acceptable rules, because I don't think that we should have, like you said, the lawyers can do that, no problem, but the paralegals don't. I think there should be a consistency there. So that's one thing we need to look at. And if there's, I think in some cases, you probably do need more education. And at what point, how far is the Law Society like regulating, like letting you do it on your own and kind of just finding where that competency level is, and then regulating and being like, okay, you've passed a test, or you need to know certain things to be competent in immigration law in order to do it. I think there's just more discussion to have on it. And just, I want to see more consistency between both professions in terms of how I would move forward with this.
Now, I mean, one of the biggest inconsistencies certainly is the amount of sort of internship or articling for lawyers, right? In terms of the various paths. We have like a LPP program where you can do some simulated placement and then part of it in a firm. But I mean, in either way you slice it, I mean, up until last convocation, where the proposal of moving from 120 to 200, or the report was brought to go to 240 hours, it still lags behind, in terms of the training, hands-on or experiential learning that lawyers are getting right now. What can be done? I mean, either, again, if you're elected from the Law Society's perspective of looking at more hands-on training, and again, it doesn't have to come from as someone in career colleges and public colleges, that some of it has to obviously come from the schools. But what can the Law Society be doing? Because all of the people that are already licensed or have completed their studies and may be writing the licensing exams this year, there's a big gap, right? As you know, there's a huge number of people leaving the profession after becoming licensed. So is there something the Law Society can be doing to address this gap there in terms of licensed but not going into practice or getting out of practice relatively quickly? And or how much of it is going back to the curriculum and education and programs like that to begin with?
Okay, well, there was a lot there. So let's, if I take it one by one. So right now, I think the difference between the articling and the paralegals is that articling is actually separate from your curriculum. Like, you do your full year, your 3 years of law school, and then you interview for different articling positions. And that's a completely separate piece where it's like the 1 year away from the schooling you did. Whereas for paralegals, the paralegal placement is part of your, like, you can't graduate from your paralegal program until you've done this, what used to be the 120. So that's different. So if we were going to try to make them on par, they would, you'd have to take the placement outside of the education program. And I think that is more of a question for people who are program coordinators or instructors that can speak to the feasibility of doing that and the problems. Because I mean, even increasing the hours was wonderful in terms of, like, you want to have more hours in the field, practicing your skill sets. But at the same time, now, is that causing issues in certain jurisdictions where you can't, it's harder to meet the 240 hours, so we have a different framework in both professions, so it's hard to compare them because they're not the same. Like they're not structured the same. So if you'd have to take the paralegal placement outside of the education piece to be able to even start to compare with the articling. But I do love the LPP, can't remember the acronym here, but basically experiential learning. So if you weren't able to secure an articling position, you could go through that program and you would have more, you'd be able to meet your requirements that way. I would love to see something like that for paralegals. Now, again, I think a lot of these questions are from me from the outside, never having been in the education space. So I would reserve comment on that in terms of feasibility, because I'm happy to look at different issues here and I think the first thing I'd have to do is talk to a lot of the stakeholders, make sure that the people who are on the front line, we're talking to them, we're figuring out what makes sense and how do we fill that gap, because I don't think that as an outsider, I have the full picture to be able to make a educated decision at this stage, at least, because I'm on the outside of all of this.
And I mean, that also brings up a point, because no, you're saying I'm coming from the outside, but on the other hand, I hear certainly everyone paints the Good Governance Coalition members kind of, you're the establishment in terms of, I mean, on the paralegal side, right? We, in about 20 minutes, I'll talk with Michelle and I can ask her some of these questions, but essentially whatever happened with Michelle's doing kind of now, you get lumped into, right? And even from the lawyer candidates, right? That the previous bencher, Good Governance Coalition lawyer benchers, but the new outsiders, as you've coined it, are sort of treated the same way. Well, if you're running with them, then how do we distinguish, right? And kind of going back to where we started with, but how much of that in terms rings true, right? In terms of that criticism that, well, Michelle was on your team there and she was the one on the paralegal standing committee. She's the chair. They came up with this report. How much of that gets linked now to you? And is that really fair?
Well, I don't think it's fair. I mean, I don't think it's fair to paint anyone with the same brush ever, because we're individuals. I think it's an easy way to dismiss people by just, like I said, painting them all with the same brush and just saying they're all the same. And we're not. Like 4 out of 5 of the paralegals have never been benchers. So we're on the outside, we're on the outside looking in at what this position might look like. So I don't think it's fair. I think, I think the people that are really serious about voting and finding, candidates that would be really good to be benchers will look past some of this criticism and look deeper, and others won't. And I can't control that. I don't think it's fair. I'm not responsible for somebody else's actions. I'm coming in here right now. I'm working in-house. I wouldn't consider myself establishment by any means. And just because we're working together in a group doesn't mean that we're all, again, the same person, essentially. So, yeah, that's.
And I guess that to go back to your point about fees, kind of where we were looking at sort of bringing things similarly, would increasing scope therefore then increase fees, right? In terms of whether it's insurance, right? Because there may be no areas. So kind of how, you had proposed perhaps deferring, in your first year. I mean, another big chunk of costs there go to even writing those exams, upwards of like $1,000 right out of school. And now we've added 120 hours where largely unpaid that, again, is going to incur deeper debt perhaps, or I mean, some students may not be able to even sort of organize their time to work their real full-time job and then get their 240 hours. But what else could be done in terms of looking at fees and looking at costs for those entering into the profession? But at the same time, some of those may have to go up because there may be more, insurance or just, even this, whatever this competency fund that I'm hearing about is proposed. But what would you say kind of in, again, balancing, try to keep fees down, but also create more access to other areas?
Well, again, that's because there's so many factors there's so many variables. That's the kind of thing where you sit down and you look at the different scenarios and you work. So I wouldn't be able to give you an answer right off the bat because, it's number crunching here. Look at what would happen if we did this, what would happen if this, went up, or so it's different scenarios there. But, when you speak to Paula on my team, she's actually proposed something else, and I'll let her speak to this, but it was more like prorated, having prorated fees depending on what year you're in, like first year licensee. So I'll let her speak to that, but that was one of her suggestions for dealing with this particular thing. And I think it's a great idea. But again, just a lot of this stuff has so many variables. And so it's really hard to just kind of pinpoint, here's what it would look like, and here's what we should be doing, because everything requires research. And I think it would be irresponsible to be like, well, this is how it should be done. I'm open to looking at all these different variables. And I do think that particular question requires more number crunching and looking at the scenarios and seeing what would be feasible and realistic. And that's probably going to take more than just me looking at it to be able to give you a realistic answer.
And then the last point you brought up was AI. And I know talked to a few of the lawyer candidates about this. I was sharing, I think that the Chat GPT can pass a bar exam somewhere. I read the headline somewhere. And, as an educator, obviously the concerns of now, how do we keep up with our assignments, right? But that's a very, now we're talking about the people leaving the practice, and then we're talking about scope and everything. But, with more sort of do-it-yourself legal kits and things like that out there, and now you have robot lawyers and such, right? That how does this kind of affect practice for paralegals? And then I guess the second part to it, as you touched on, is how do we kind of stay ahead of all of the technology and make sure that we are not leaving ourselves prone to some gap there in terms of legal services and being provided to the public?
Well, with this particular area, we probably have to meet regularly, like more so than maybe other committees, because things change so fast. Like when you look at change with technology, it's not change in years, it's like change in weeks and days. Like it's so fast. So we probably have to meet more regularly to keep on top of stuff. And how it would affect paralegals, I think it's still too new to be able to give you a good answer on that, because I'm still learning about where we're going with this and what that would look like. I know that people are very interested in it, and a lot of people are already experimenting with it. So how will it affect us? I think, just in general, some of the issues I've already seen with it, and this is just on a very superficial level without going very deep, is, there's third-party rights we'd probably have to consider, because these are a platform owned by somebody else. There's the fact that you're inputting information into the system. So do you own that information? So it's a copyright issue. And then who owns the output? So you're putting something input, and what the output, who's going to own that? And then there's also just the fact that, in general, with these both professions, confidentiality is a very important aspect of what we do. So how do you ensure confidentiality? So I guess when you're talking about like, how is it going to affect paralegals, I think those are issues that'll affect both lawyers and paralegals. So, but I think it's too early for me to say anything about specifically what are some other ways, because it's still very much new territory for me as well. Even though I'm like seeing it in my business, it's still, I have to go back and review a lot of the stuff that I'm learning, because it's happening so fast. It's really detailed. And just some of the new vocabulary is still a bit above my head. So it's new territory, but those are the things I've noticed so far.
I think we've touched on sort of those main points. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to mention there in terms of, if elected, in terms of your platform, but here's the opportunity to share.
Okay. Well, I think, we can talk about platform, we can talk about specific issues, but I think ultimately at the end of the day, it's really important to look at the qualities that venture possess, or potential venture possesses, because, the platform pieces that I mentioned today are today's current issues, but, who knows in a 4-year period, what else will show up. So I think it's more important to look at what kind of qualities should a venture have. And that could be in terms of, we're always talking about a big one is collaboration. You have to be able to collaborate with other people. You have to be able to respectfully listen to somebody else's opinions on, maybe proposing on how to do something. It could be something you don't agree with, but at least having them feel seen and heard, so that starts to create a more harmonious environment where you could find common ground. You need somebody who understands board governance, how to, what is expected of you in this kind of role, and who understands, the time commitment, is willing, understands it, but is also willing to do it. You need basically respect and civility. I mean, there's a lot of things. So when you're looking at all the different candidates, what I would say is like, really look at the qualities as well. And has this person demonstrated those qualities up to date? Because it's not just about, playing this role once you get there. It's like, do you do this throughout? And, even when you're not sitting there at convocation, do you show those kind of values? So, I mean, that's something that I think is really important beyond anything that could be on my platform today.
How about maybe we can switch it up here as we get kind of to the end. Maybe tell us something that any of the people that are listening may not know about you, or something quirky or out there.
Well, if they watched my other interview, they found out that my family has owned a parrot for the last 19 years. So people find that kind of unusual and funny, and they always want to see the parrot more than me once I tell them about that, but which is why the parrot is not here today. But yeah, I'd say that was more one of the unusual things that people find out and find funny.
And the last couple of questions here. Again, we've been talking about looking at the impact of curriculum. I have students that are going to be listening. They won't be able to vote, but they're interested in terms of what's going to happen and how it's going to impact them. So any advice, any words of wisdom that you have for students that are listening and looking to join you in the profession?
Well, I think one thing to keep in mind is that don't compare your chapter 1 with somebody's like chapter 20, because often what I found is people see others working and they're like, wow, I'd love to do what you're doing, but I I'm not good at public speaking, or I'm not good at, what I mean? And I'm thinking that person probably wasn't either, and you're just seeing that person maybe 20 steps ahead of you. So and that specific example I gave is actually something that I hear quite a bit, is like, I'm not good at public speaking. So I would say that, again, don't compare chapter 1 to chapter 20, but also think about, how do you reframe that? How can I become better at public speaking? And one of the things I did specifically for this area was, my friend and I enrolled in an introductory acting class like years ago. I felt sick to my stomach every class because it was once a week. But I mean, my goal in that class was like, just get through all of them. That would be my accomplishment, was actually overcoming the anxiety and feeling sick to my stomach every time, and then showing up. And then, of course, we did a lot of improv. So that helped me kind of break out of my shell. So that would be, maybe I didn't make it sound all that attractive, but I mean, there's certain ways that you can get the skills that you need. So I would reframe all the comments made. It's like, oh, I'm not good at this. Well, how about saying, I'm not good at this yet? And then how can I become good at this? And I'm happy to talk to anybody who maybe wants to talk about my acting days, or some of the other things I did to help me kind of get over some of those things that I felt that were maybe holding me back.
I mean, again, it's always good because a lot of those things people don't realize translate. I mean, we're kind of having, this is pretty much improv here, right? So you never realize how much your other skills kind of come into hand when you enter into the legal profession.
Oh yeah, big time, especially the acting skills, learning how to project your voice. And maybe I have to go back for a refresher, but trying to avoid those filler words like and I've noticed in my own, I was like, oh, stop looking up there. And I think that's more of a just I don't know if it's more of a nervousness thing, but like, clearly we all have to improve along the way. So, I mean, nobody is ever done, and it's just, on to the next thing. And I'm probably looking ahead at somebody else and be like, oh, I want to get to that point. So always look at, what's my next step and how can I get better at it? And I'm not better at it yet. The big word is yet. Add that to the end of your sentence.
Perfect. So, Demetra, last question here. There are paralegals that are listening in and tuning in and watching. Why should they use one of their 5 votes for you?
Well, if they've liked anything I've said today and they like the values that I have and how I like to approach things, then I'd love your vote. And I think I have the experience and the skill sets to do a good job. I'm willing to do it, so I can do it. I have the skill sets and I'm willing to do it. And so the only thing missing right now is I just need your support. So if you resonate with anything I said, I'd love to have your vote.
Once again, thanks for taking the time to join us here. Thanks for everyone for tuning in. And again, if you're listening live, Michelle's up in a few minutes. So take care, everyone.
All right. Bye. Thank you.